Hi everyone, Ashley Mailloux and Gino Buccola here with the Daily Racing Forum. This Saturday, all eyes will be on at Pimlico as they have a 14 race program for Preakness Day. And it's not the last race, it's the second to last race, Gino, as we look at the grade one at Preakness, mile and a 3/16 on the dirt for these 3-year-olds. And the big announcement coming on Wednesday that Muth, the morning line favorite, is Spike to Fever, will be scratched. So it does leave us a field of 8 here. And just overall, what are your thoughts on this year's edition?
Yeah, we're recording just a couple hours after that news. So now we will be down to a field of 8. We still will have your Kentucky Derby winner. We still will have, I think, a few heavy hitters. We have horses that performed very well in the Arkansas Derby coming back in here. We have horses that come in for Bob Baffert and for D. Wayne Lucas, two of the all-time greats when it comes to Triple Crown wins. I mean, Baffert's looking for his 9th Preakness victory. The coach looking for his 7th. So we will take a hit with Muth out. It might be a little bit more of an open betting race, though, if you were someone who thought Muth was sort of a standout. For me, I kind of thought Muth was a little vulnerable, so it'll probably take a hit on some of the horses that you and I might have liked to play, Ashley.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. For some people, they'll be happy. For us, maybe not so much because Muth was 8-5 on the morning line and would have gone off favored in this event. Now we're going to look at the time form U.S. pace projections here. And I think the main horse really talk about with the outside draw is Muth's stablemate, Imagination, who likes to be forward. There's no doubt about it. Always tries to be in those top 2 or 3 horses. And last time out was pretty close up in the Santa Anita Derby. Just Steele, who we saw was disappointing in the Kentucky Derby. He's another one that occasionally he likes to be a little bit more forward as well.
Yeah, I think what makes it a little tricky is you have the 2 D. Wayne Lucas runners, and either one of them or both of them could be on the lead based on some of their recent running lines, right? With Seize the Gray, he showed a little bit more speed than expected last time out, and it worked out well for him. He was right up on the pace and then kind of re-engaged. And then for Just Steele, he showed a lot more speed last time out. He also is capable of doing that. I don't know if they're both going to be battling each other. I'm just sort of going under the assumption that one of them is going to be pressing the pace, and I hope I'm going to keep my fingers crossed and that's right, along with Imagination, because just watching his races back, I don't know if he really wants to sit off and pass horses, Ashley. I think he seems like he waits on horses a little bit, and there have been a few times when he's loomed up and looked like he was going to blow by. So I think for him, the game plan is going to be just try to get out front and get loose.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with that. I mean, he doesn't like to pass horses. He typically gets tired in those final jumps. So they have to hopefully get him on the lead, set reasonable fractions, and maybe he can pull off sort of the National Treasure upset, will you say, where National Treasure got easy fractions and was able to take them gate to wire. And I agree with what you said about the D. Wayne Lucas horses. The coach, these horses just, I mean, at times they are forward, at times they're not. You really don't know what you're going to get. So it's kind of like I don't know, it's like a lottery ticket. Not sure if you're going to win or not. I don't know, but they do have the ability to both be forward. And just to note here, Catching Freedom, the number 3, has the LP flag in. We know I can kind of battle this. I mean, he has closed from pretty far off of it. I think he is more of a mid-pack horse when you try to get him in his best trips. Does he always end up there? No, but it is nice to note that he can close from off of it.
Yeah, I think we both have kind of been on that with him as our top pick in the Derby, just thinking that he's not as deep of a closer as he sometimes get kind of typecast as. So the key for him in a race like this is, yeah, can he be a little bit ahead of some of the deeper closers and not have to really be at the mercy of the race shape in front of him?
So we'll kick off here the kind of field with the number 1, Mugatu, who was that one horse that Jeff Angler was really hoping to get in. He was the first horse to get called up, and at kind of Derby Day, he was not called up, but they've decided to go to the Preakness. We last saw him in the Bluegrass, where I know he's 0 for 3 on the dirt, but I think, the Bluegrass was his only time going 2 turns on the dirt, and he split that field mid-pack.
Yeah, the positives is improving and coming off of a career best Beyer speed figure, but he was 5th at 180 to 1 in the Bluegrass last time out, and he really hasn't run anything close enough to be competitive with this group. So to me, he's just going to have to improve to be in the mix here.
And it's interesting to note his lone win was down at Gulfstream Park in November of 2023. He was aboard Joe Bravo, who's booked to ride him again for these connections on Saturday. The number 2, Uncle Heavy's up next. And we're going to take a look at one of his races, not his most recent effort in the Wood Memorial, but 2 back when he scored an upset in the grade 3 Withers. And it was over the muddy track, Gino, a mile and an eighth. He got a really nice trip here. And I thought, he's going to be pretty game here in these final jumps to the wire. He's going to get up in time, but he's a grinder. And I think in terms of a great story, Butch Reed sending out a Preakness runner, it's a pretty exciting one.
Yeah, he's a grade 3 winner. He's going to lure Irad Ortiz Jr., one of the best jockeys in the world. So a couple positives right there. And I think his 5th place finish in the most recent race is probably a little bit better than it looks if you just looked at the running line on paper, because he, after kind of just being out of it early, he did try and he was still finishing strong there. Now he has the career, his top buyer speed figure is the lowest of any of the horses in this field. So he will need to improve, but I do think he's a little bit better than his speed figures there. So I wouldn't be shocked to see him at the bottom of the exotics, Ashley. And I think you kind of have a case for him as a live long shot.
I think he is a live long shot because, you talk about his buyers being on the lower side. His only win outside of Pennsylvania, where I think looking at who he faced, I understand why the buyers probably came up low. You look at that in the times, but over the mud in 84, it was a good performance. He got up in time. Yes, El Grande O was maybe tiring. And I agree with what you said about the Wood Memorial. And I think the big thing to notice, he had post 12, which I do think did hinder him a bit there. And I like that he's drawn more towards the inside. You talked about the rider change. No one's going to complain if Irad Ortiz Jr. is climbing aboard their horse. So he's 20-1 on the morning line. Now, we all know this is no shock. If you watch any of these previews, I've loved Catching Freedom. I don't know. For about 2 months now, he's been my horse for anything going forward. As we look at the number 3, Catching Freedom, I feel like he would have gotten more maybe lost in the shuffle had Muth not been scratched. Now with the scratch of Muth, maybe more eyes will be on Catching Freedom. But the thing I struggle with, Gino, is when you go back to the Derby, we all talk about the top 3, Mystic Dan, Sierra Leone, Forever Young. You don't really hear anyone talking about Catching Freedom, but I thought he ran one heck of a race. He was 4th. He was by far the best horse, right? In terms of 4th, no one was really that close to him. And he still was trying in the stretch.
Yeah, and it's not like he had a ton of trouble in the race, but he was down on the inside. He was saving ground, so that's a trip that you like. But he did get stopped a few times where he wanted to go and he waited, then he wanted to go and he had to wait. So he could have been a little bit closer. I don't know if he would have won the race, but I think if you flip trips there, he absolutely could have been closer. And I think he's a major player in here too, Ashley. I completely agree with your assessment. The way that the race was shaping up with Muth in it, it felt like he was maybe going to get forgotten about. I thought the horse number 8, Tuscan Gold, is going to get some action and kind of be maybe a wise guy horse. And feels like Catching Freedom was sort of kind of falling through the cracks. You just weren't hearing as much buzz about him. Now his price will probably be shorter, although it may be a little bit. I think the perception of him winning this race now might be a little more difficult with Muth out of it. So if we can get him in the 5 to 1-ish range, I think he's a very, very logical contender here. He's been right up at the top of this class all along. Every time he's been in a race, he showed up and he's been really competitive. And I feel so confident that he will be passing horses late. So he's going to be in the mix for me again.
We talked about it. Maybe he's had some troubled trips in the past. And even in Louisiana Derby, he had to angle out very wide, was at the back of the pack, not ideal. I think the other thing to note is now with the scratch of Muth, he's encountering his shortest field to date. He only has 7 other rivals. There's a lot less of a chance of, having to navigate, say, through the Derby, right, through 19 other rivals. So I don't know. It's obvious. I still like Catching Freedom. I'm still a fan. I hope I get 6 to 1 on.
And one more thing, we don't see this barn bring horses back quickly all that often, Ashley. That to me is a positive that they've taken a few days after the Derby, looked at how this horse was doing in the morning, seen the energy of Catching Freedom, and said, you know what? I don't think that race took a whole lot out of him. He was saving ground down on the inside. It wasn't like he had to run really wide and a lot further than others in here. He ran his race. Can he come right back in a few weeks and do it again? That's a real positive to me that they just even want to put him back in this race when it's not something these connections do often.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Now, the 4 Muth is out, moves us to the number 5, Mystic Dan, the Kentucky Derby winner. And when you look at his performances, obviously there were a lot of doubts going into the Derby. Did, he kind of peak or at least have his best performance on and off track at Oakland when he did get the 101 buyer, and he had to sort of prove himself. And I think really a lot of credit goes to not only Kenny McPeek, but Brian Hernandez Jr. for that ride. Put him in a great spot where he was able to save ground and then kind of, make his way up the inside rail. And he was just able to hold off Sierra Leone and Forever Young. The wire came up at the right time. I wonder what your thoughts are. I think with the scratch of Muth, it does benefit a horse like Mystic Dan.
Oh, quite a bit. And yeah, as you mentioned, one tip of the hat I wanted to give was to Brian Hernandez Jr. just for how fast and smooth he was able to get Dan out of the gate. It was unbelievable. He was so quickly out of the gate and comfortable. And then he was just able to pick where he wanted to go and what he wanted to do. And when you see horses who win the Derby, a lot of times it's that instant great start. They get out and then they have some options. Their rider can pick and choose where they want to go. fantastic ride. I'm really curious what the tactics will be with Dan. I think he's going to be more forwardly placed than he was in the Derby, but keep in mind, he actually like broke right on top of the field. So he was fast away. He just decided to sit back behind a really quick pace, and he was really handy that day. I think he's going to be forward in here, Ashley, and I think he's going to be maybe one of 3 horses pushing it. I would not be shocked to see him, Imagination, and one of the Dwayne Lucas runners all forward in here looking for position, maybe even 3 across the track, because I think he's going to want to try to stay out of traffic trouble, and they're going to want to put him in the race now, especially with Muth out of there. So I think he's in the mix. I think he'll come right back and run a big race. I have him slightly underneath, but I expect Dan to show up and give another really good account of himself.
And it's worth noting his connections were a little concerned about making that race, 2 weeks later, because in the past they've tried it. It hasn't worked out. But just kind of reading and hearing some of the interviews with Kenny McPeak, they've done all the right things by the horse to make sure everything is kind of tip top in terms of his blood work, his eating, his training, and they seem to think all systems are a go. So 5-2 on the Derby winner, Mystic Dan. We go to the 6th. He's the gray, as you mentioned, 1 of 2 here for the coach, Dwayne Lucas. He was the winner of the Pat Day Mile, and I thought he ran really well. I did not like him at all in that event. If you backed him, 9-1 were the odds that you got, and he was really close to what was a very fast-paced Gino.
I was shocked at the running style we saw from him in that race in particular, because, you look at his previous races, he was coming from off the pace. He was cutting back in that race, and it was a race where they went really quick early on. So none of those things equaled him being close to or on the lead, at least the way that I was looking at that race. And he was actually in between horses. He backed up, and then he came on again. It was extremely impressive. Now he wheels back in 2 weeks. I just don't know what I'm expecting from him in here, Ashley, from a trip standpoint. That's why I have a hard time pegging him as a horse that I really like, because I can't picture the race in my head, how he wins this or what type of trip he gets. I'm expecting them to maybe be forwardly placed again, because that worked out so well for him in the most recent race. So yeah, I mean, I would not be shocked to see him show up and run well here, but he has to get faster on the speed figures. He's also coming back in 2 weeks, and I don't really know what kind of trip to project for him. So lots of question marks for me with Seize the Gray.
And maybe a similar storyline here with his stablemate, the 7, Just Steel, who has 2 wins on his resume, but they're both at sprint distances. Mind you, his best buyer speed figure of a 95 was 2 starts back in the Grade 1 Arkansas Derby, and who won that? Muth, who was scratched. But I think the other aspect of that is who was behind him, and pretty well behind him, Mystic Dan. Now, obviously, the Derby, to me, was a change of tactics. He was closer to it. The pace was hotter, and he backed out of that. Now he's coming back in 2 weeks. Obviously, his stablemate's doing the same thing, right? Coming back in 2 weeks. I couldn't get a strong feel for him, but I will say, even though he hasn't won any races this year, when you kind of look at his second place finishes, he has at least tried, and he's hung around for those minor shares.
Yeah, and he's really seasoned too. He's run 12 times. He's your Arkansas Derby runner-up. What I'm expecting now, and sometimes we can get ourselves in trouble when we do this as handicappers, but we're always trying to project and read between the lines. I think with Joel Rosario coming aboard him, that means maybe they're going to get a more patient ride here, because that's usually what I think it signals with someone when you with riders like someone like Joel, who's such a strong finisher, maybe the best at closing in the game as far as like finishing well, knowing where the wire is. I wonder if that is the game plan now with someone like Joel jumping aboard. They're going to take him back a little bit and have Seize the Gray go. And that way you have the 2 Lucas trainees not necessarily going right after each other early on. That's how I'm projecting. And if that happens, I actually think he could hit the board and outrun his odds. So if I were looking at one of the long shots in here, you were mentioning Uncle Heavy. I didn't have him in my top selections, but if you're looking for a price horse to use underneath, for me, it would probably be Just Steel.
Okay, so then Chad Brown, Tyler Gaffalion, they just narrowly missed in the Derby. They're going to team up here, though, with a fresh horse, and that being the number 8 Tuscan Gold, who was 3rd behind Catching Freedom in the Louisiana Derby. It's his first time facing winners, graded stakes competition. He had a very nice maiden score, 2 back at Gulfstream Park. I think the conversation about him, Gino, to me, he's become a little bit of a wise guy horse. A lot of people are talking about him on social media with the scratch of Muth. You have to wonder if the 8-1 morning line is realistic with him. But I think in terms of trip, he has the ability to potentially be tactical here, where in this condensed field of 8 runners, maybe he's mid-pack early on.
Yeah, I liked him with Muth in here, but just as you're pointing out, the trip he may be able to get now without Muth, I think could be a lot better. I could just see him sitting nicely behind some of these horses, maybe 4 horses that want to go more forward. And then he might be able to get the jump on the 1, 2, and 3, who are probably the real deep closers, or the horses that aren't quite as quick early on. So I could really see him sitting well. He's a lightly raced horse. He's going to be making the 3rd start of his form cycle now. In the Louisiana Derby, he was really, really wide. He was bumping around early on. And you just don't win with trips that are that wide. The top of the lane, I thought he was done and going to back up. He kept grinding and he kept trying. And I think there's really some ability here. So I'm expecting a big step forward with you from him. But I completely agree with what you said, Ashley. He is the wise guy horse. He is definitely going to be taking a lot of money in here. And I would not be shocked, especially now with Muth, if this is a horse that's all the way down to like 7-2. That really wouldn't surprise me at all with the way the money's going to shift around a little bit. Mystic Dan's going to get a lot more now. And when an 8-5 favorite comes out, a lot of these horses are going to get cut down quite a bit. And that'll probably be the case with Tuscan Gold. So while I don't know if he's going to necessarily be a horse I bet to win because of that price, I feel really confident about the race he's going to run in here.
And I think it's a good point to bring up when we talk about the Derby, the Preakness, the Belmont, even the Breeders' Cup Classic. There always is a wise guy horse, and in this case, it happens to be him for a lot of the reasons that you mentioned. Last time out, he ran very respectable considering his circumstances, and hey, it was at the mile and 3/16 distance, so nice to see him be able to handle that without issue. We're going to round out the field here with the number 9, Imagination. We will take a look at his most recent performance, which is a runner-up placing in the Santa Anita Derby. And I think when you look at this Grade 1 event as a whole, I don't think it was the strongest, Gino. I think there were some questions about him getting the mile and an eighth. And no, he doesn't get the win. But once again, he shows that ability to be game to the wire. And him and Stronghold here for these final stages, neither horse wanted to give an inch.
Yeah, he's a real trier, honestly, Ashley. And it's hard to knock his overall form. But what I think you'll see when you watch his races back is that there have been multiple times where at the top of the lane, he looked like he was going to win that particular race by 5 lengths. I think 3 different times in his career. And in all of those races, he just waits on horses. Once he strikes the front, he starts kind of waiting around a little bit, and then he battles. It's not like he completely hangs and stops, but I don't know if he wants to sit off and try to pass horses. So I think Frankie from the outside is going to say, come with me and you'll be in a world of pure imagination. He's just going to go. That's got to be the game plan.
Okay, I don't know if Frankie will be singing Willy Wonka, though, during his ride, but I agree with
I
you.
will be at least.
Hey, there you go. I think with the outside draw, you're correct. He has to go. And we're talking about Bob Baffert here, Frankie Dettori Imagination. I'm just thinking of Bob and a sort of horse like National Treasure. We know that horses like him, if you want to make a comparison, if they get an easy lead and they are uncontested, we've seen horses go gate to wire at the mile and 3/16 distance. Doesn't matter if we're talking about Pimlico or even other races. And there's always that possibility. But I just have to think with those other horses that we talked about, we don't really know kind of what the 2 Dwayne Lucas horses are going to do. Someone has to press this horse. Yeah. Again, with that said, there have been times where he's had that easy lead, as you've talked about, at the top of the stretch, and now he's got to go further than he's ever gone. So that is the field for the Grade 1 Preakness. It's top pick time. And Gino, I'm curious. Okay, you're not with me anymore. You're with me in the Derby and Catching Freedom, but now you're going to go to Tuscan Gold.
Yeah, the key is just a little bit more tactical, I think. I think Tuscan Gold can get a little bit of the jump on Catching Freedom in here. I would prefer Catching Freedom a little bit more with Muth in there, because I think that would just make the early pace a little bit more contested, and I think there would be a lot more jockeying for position early on. I feel like a lot of these horses might be kind of content with where they are. I do think it'll be an honest enough pace, though, that it will set up for Tuscan Gold. Imagination, I upgraded a little bit with the scratch of Moot, so I think he will be in the mix. And Catching Freedom, obviously a major player. I don't really have any knocks on Mystic Dan. I think he may have run his big race a few weeks ago, and some of the others might just be a little bit better suited 2 weeks from now to get their big win. And I didn't put him in the selections, but as I pointed out earlier, if you were looking for a long shot to throw in the mix, mine would be Just Steel.
Yeah, and you talked about, Mystic Dan might have peaked last time out in the Derby. I think it's a positive sign for both him and Catching Freedom. Their connections, I mean, Catching Freedom didn't really talk about going to the Preakness until they said, we're going. That was kind of the first that you heard of it. In Mystic Dan, Kenny said, we're going to wait, we're going to see. And then, he did right by the horse. He said, we're going. This horse is eating up. He's doing everything the right way, so we're going to go for it. So I think there's kind of an interesting dialogue there with those 2 horses. Obviously, we mentioned it too. Also exiting the Derby is Just Steel, but a very different sort of circumstance. He did not run well in the Derby where the other 2 did. And I said, I've been on Catching Freedom, especially since the Louisiana Derby. I'm sticking with him here. I do wonder with the scratch of Muth, does that hinder him? But at the same time, I want to see him get a trip where I truly think he's a mid-pack horse. And I just think his last two, he hasn't been able to get those trips. He's still run well. And I think if he can get the trip that he prefers, he can take a step forward. So I use him on top. I don't think we're going to get the right price on him, though. And we'll see. It depends what happens with your horse, Gino, Tuscan Gold. He's 8-1 on the morning line. I'll definitely be reaching out to see if you get 8-1, because I think you might be lucky if you get that come on Saturday.
I think one of the two of our horses will be playable, I feel like. But if they both are down in the like 7-2 range, then I don't think either one of them necessarily is playable at that price. So if Catching Freedom floats up, or if Catching Freedom stays around where he is, I may be on the win end there. And I think as handicappers, Ashley, we have to be handicappers and gamblers also, right? We can handicap the race, look at the race, think about what we expect to happen. But then if the betting board is different, we have to be ready to call an audible. And I think there are a couple horses in this race that their chances of winning are not far off from one another, that as long as if one of them floats up quite a bit, like Imagination, if he is up and kind of gets forgotten about, maybe it's him. I do think there are 3 or 4 horses in here with kind of equal chances of winning. So if I want to play this race individually, I might just wait, see who is the best price there. And that would be how I want to play the race, like on top.
And you bring up a great point. You don't have to play this race individually. A lot of great wagering opportunities on that wagering menu, both Friday and Saturday at Pimlico. And something maybe to consider would be the late pick 4 that does kick off in race number 11. It has one race after the Preakness race 14 that it ends up in, or there is that late pick 5, which gets kicked off on the turf in race 9. So different ways to kind of structure around the Preakness. You can bet it straight up, or you can get involved with some of those multi-race sequences. But just as a reminder, the Preakness post time just after 7 p.m. Eastern time on Saturday. It's race 13 of 14. It's at Pimlico. Good luck.